Wojciech Terlecki.
Shomec. The President of the United States sat in his chair, holding a glass of bourbon in his hand. Around him, his colleagues gathered. Most of them were dressed in expensive suits, among which military uniforms adorned with colorful decorations stood out. They gleamed against the backdrop of the gray bunker walls, making the chef's white attire look very modest. The President took a sip of the liquid and asked in a weary voice, "Do we have any news from the outside?" "Yes, Mr. President." One of the military personnel straightened up. "But unfortunately, they're not good." "Speak. I'm accustomed to it." "We've lost contact with the last resistance centers. We've lost control of the entire country. Besides these walls, there are few living people left." "And what about the situation abroad?" The man asked more out of obligation than wanting to hear the answer. "Mr. President, the enemy has taken over the planet." The man stood up thoughtfully and approached the portrait of George Washington hanging on the wall. He touched the fabric of the Star-Spangled Banner. Unexpectedly, he smiled. "It's so absurd. We lost our planet due to a gastronomic misunderstanding. By the way, do we still have some Shomec?" The chef straightened up. "Yes, Mr. President." "Then prepare our last supper." Dinner was coming to an end. The President ceremoniously skewered a bite of the dish with his fork and brought it to his mouth. He chewed on the substance, which was something between meat and plant. In texture, it resembled a noble beef steak and was equally juicy. He let the sauce spread across his palate, reaching every taste bud. One felt like holding the food in the mouth for a long time, but eventually, the moment to swallow came. And then the food tantalized the last taste receptors just at the throat's entrance. After a while, the man reached for a glass of wine, the best that had been evacuated to the shelter. "Gentlemen, losing the war and losing the planet doesn't mean the enemy has won. We still have teeth, and we can bite back. The invaders won't get our beautiful green planet. They'll have to settle for a burnt radioactive desert. General, you know what needs to be done." The officer rose from the table, saluted, finished the remnants of wine, and left the room. He returned after 10 minutes. Soldiers accompanied him, wearing loosely buttoned uniform jackets. They held open bottles of various assortments of alcohol in their hands. "It's done." 15 minutes later, the earth began to tremble. Chef Philip Peter Russo took off his white apron and sat on a chair by the entrance to the kitchen. His work had ended. He realized that he had been a witness and a participant in events and wondered if he could have made them unfold differently. Long ago, while traveling through Europe, a senator visited a restaurant where a young ambitious chef was in charge. This American later became the President of the United States and offered Philip Peter Russo the opportunity to take over the kitchen of the White House. This story began with the inauguration of another President of the United States. Philip Peter peeked from behind the curtain, separating the kitchen from the dining room, observing the guests being ushered in by the servants. Each of them was dressed in the most elegant attire typical of their part of the world. Diplomats and politicians sat at the table, engaging in casual conversations. The President was persuaded to start the ceremony with a culinary showcase by the new chef, followed by the official part and toasts with less elaborate dishes. The chef felt a lump in his throat. His breath quickened. In a similar situation, his predecessor had served hamburgers, steaks, and ribs, catering to the plebeian taste of the then president. Now it was supposed to be different, but would the guests appreciate the subtle refinement and courage of the White House kitchen? And if they didn't like it, would they show their dissatisfaction? Would they leave the dishes untouched? The worries turned out to be unfounded. The guests, bored with typical dishes, warmly welcomed Russo's idea, which proposed a revival of offal. As he later walked among the guests with a glass of wine, he joyfully answered questions about the preparation of sweetbreads, beef hearts, quail liver, and scalded hamster testicles served instead of caviar. 2 years later, there was no major city in the world where branches of Russo's restaurants couldn't be found. Chefs personally trained by him served exquisite dishes to the most discerning customers. Everything was going splendidly, and then disaster struck. During one of the ordinary dinners, a secretary approached the President and whispered something in his ear. He looked at him with surprise and reached for the telephone receiver. Astronomical observatories around the world had spotted an object approaching the Earth. The fear of destruction caused by an unnoticed large meteorite turned into excitement when the object began transmitting a sequence of prime numbers into the ether, which was unprecedented among comets and asteroids. The excitement was so strong that when the unidentified object appeared in the Earth's atmosphere, all the superpowers scrambled their fighter jets. "If this is a spacecraft of aliens, it must land here," ordered the White House host in an unopposed voice. Meanwhile, Russians, Chinese, Indians, and even Syrians were sending radio coordinates guiding the landing site to their territories. The arrivals could observe the ballet of mutually tracking fighter jets waiting for the order to open fire. Eventually, the staff calculated who could win this duel and sent the aircraft back, leaving only American planes in the would-be battlefield. In this way, the potential technology of the aliens was directed to the landing site in Area 51. 6 guests turned out to be exceptionally friendly beings. They could breathe Earth's air, and their sturdy necklace bodies moved quite adeptly in Earth's gravitational field. Russo, with the eyes of a chef, assessed that they looked a bit like fish that had recently come out of the water and adapted to the land environment. Unfortunately, it turned out that the guests had no scientific qualifications. However, they invited Earthlings onto their ship without resistance. They showed how they programmed their travels, where they came from, and explained that they had never planned to appear here. Something went wrong. Generally, it's a transport ship and carries, and here, for the first time on Earth, the word Shomec appeared. When asked, "What is this?" the guests clearly rejoiced, and the translators echoed with joyful cries, "Feast! Feast!" So a reception was organized. Philip Peter was very excited. As the first, he would feed representatives of an alien civilization, but he faced an even greater challenge. Secret Service agents escorted 2 aliens into the kitchen. They trembled encouragingly and placed a mysterious container in front of the chef. "Feast, feast," repeated the translators. "Very good. Shomec." The fish-like creatures waved their broad hands and returned to the hall with their colleague. The chef cautiously opened the container, inside of which, in a kind of oil, floated pale, round shapes the size of ostrich eggs. "Do not touch," ordered the security officer. He whispered something into the microphone. Soon, several people in space suits entered the kitchen and, with rubber gloves, extracted one of the objects. They conducted some tests and took samples. "It seems it's not poisonous," one of them concluded. "It seems? And what? Should I cook it?" the chef expressed doubt. "Take a closer look at it. You're the expert," suggested the previously unseen Secretary of State. "I don't know how our guest will react to a refusal of hospitality. It could become a diplomatic issue." Russo took 2 forks and fished out one of the objects. He threw it on the table. He took the chef's knife and delicately pressed on the object. In touch, it resembled mozzarella cheese. He sniffed. "Fresh and refreshing scent," he thought. He sliced off a piece and looked around. He realized that all the kitchen staff were watching his movements. "Young one," he shouted at the kitchen assistant, "take this piece and run to the Secret Service's doghouse. Give it to one of the mutts and see if he'll eat it. If they resist, say it's the president's order." The head chef peeked out into the hall. He was curious about how the guests would receive the food he had prepared. The fish-like beings slid small pieces of the dish into their mouths with the tips of their broad hands. One could see a slight tremor passing through their bodies. "Is it tasty?" the president asked. "Good. Very good." Russo smiled to himself and made a decision. "You," he called out to the Chinese in turn, "ever drank bat blood?" The young Chinese man shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Why are you dancing like that? I always thought you were a brave culinary nation. Am I mistaken?" "No, sir." "Well then, contribute to humanity." With that, he directed the knife, at the end of which was a small piece of the unknown substance, toward the Chinese man's mouth. The culinary adept hesitated. "You'll go down in history," encouraged the chef, unaware of the ambiguity of his words. Finally, the Chinese man opened his mouth, and a piece of Shomec landed on his tongue. He spread the product across his palate with his tongue, then slid it between his molars and bit down. Russo watched as the tester's eyes widened, and the corners of his mouth lifted. Good, very good. That evening, the president didn't taste the Shomec. Security wouldn't allow it. Instead, it was the Marines, dressed in tailcoats and constituting a significant portion of the revelers, who tried it first. And it was they who first announced to the world the unearthly things being served in the White House. Unexpectedly, the guests decided to say goodbye. They left their cargo on Earth, claiming they wouldn't return home with such a load. They also provided a phone number for their company, in case anyone wanted to buy more Shomec. Price negotiable. Scientists determined that it was an organic product, harmless to health, and soon, several tons of the product ended up in Russo's restaurants, where they were turned into exquisite dishes. Shomec was served sautéed with olive oil and spices or drizzled with lemon juice. The most elaborate recipes could be tasted in the presidential dining room. Over time, the portions became smaller, and the price of the meal became literally astronomical. One day, the president decided to host a reception in honor of his wife. As the main course, he requested Shomec with spinach, a dish his wife particularly enjoyed. Unfortunately, there was not a gram of the product left in the White House or the entire Russo network. The phone left by the fish-like reportedly worked on the principle of quantum entanglement. Thanks to this, the Alien Purchasing Department immediately received a request to present a trade offer. In exchange for Shomec, the aliens wanted a lot of hay. Literally, they especially preferred oat and buckwheat hay. Orders were placed. The details of the contract quickly ceased to be a secret, and the streets of capital cities were blocked by cattle breeders who saw the aliens offer as a ploy to destroy their production profile by raising feed prices. It soon became clear that Shomec could not be delivered in the quantities expected by the market and would remain an exclusive product. To consume the cosmic delicacy, one had to go to an expensive restaurant or be invited to the White House. The crisis, as crises do, appeared unexpectedly. One day, the supplies were cut off, and piles of unclaimed hay piled up near the spaceports. The automatic secretary at the alien headquarters stopped taking messages, explaining it as memory overflow, which, considering the capabilities of molecular bones, was highly alarming. For 2 long years, no one on Earth tasted a single piece of Shomec. Admittedly, there were counterfeit versions appearing online at surprisingly low prices, but no one took seriously those who claimed to have eaten the dish just a week ago. Greenlandic poetry describing the virtues of the stellar dish gained popularity instead. Philip Pyotr Russo, as the discoverer of the product, was invited to present the literary award for a collection of poetry of this genre. He was to deliver a eulogy in honor of the laureate. The chef prepared a beautiful speech, but looking at the appearance of the distinguished lady and her demeanor, he had serious doubts whether she had ever been a customer at his restaurant or had ever had a chance to taste the dish she praised. On a certain April day, unexpectedly, ships of the aliens approaching the solar system were spotted. Earthlings opened landing sites, and soon landings took place. The guests were evidently in a hurry, as they left containers behind and, without caring about unloading cargo and loading payment, they took off in a rush. And that was the last time the fish-like beings were seen. Instead, a few months later, humanity met other inhabitants of the cosmos. These were not as open and outgoing. When the president saw them on the monitor, he looked at his colleagues in disbelief. Enlarged cockroaches were staring at him from the screen. One shouldn't succumb to the first impression, sighed the White House host, but just in case, he sent the Secretary of State to welcome them. Invited by the president for dinner, the guests firmly declined. It turned out that they considered eating as an intimate activity, unlike defecation, which socializes their community. The president pondered the curse of the first impression, which, whether one likes it or not, casts a shadow over future relations. I wouldn't want to be impolite, but I won't defecate with them. Mr. President, in ancient Rome, the secretary argued. Finally, it was decided that Marines would be sent to the guest ship to strengthen interstellar relations. To make the proper impression, they were fed with Mexican cuisine. Russo couldn't come to terms with the fact that this time he would be bypassed in building interstellar relations. Let's show them that we're not a cosmic backwater, We know dishes from other planets, and we can contribute something to gastronomy, he persuaded the president. Eventually, the president relented and agreed to prepare something for takeaway. The chef took out a few pieces of Shomec from the fridge and then briefly soaked them in vinegar. This made the surface of the dish firm. Now he delicately pierced the brownish crust, from under which leaked its own sauce. The dish was garnished with truffle strips, resembling pasta. The meal was packed in styrofoam containers and handed over to an Hindu on a scooter, who delivered it directly to the spacecraft. It didn't take long before a terrifying squeal emanated from inside the vehicle. The hatch opened, and two frightened soldiers in improperly fastened pants jumped out onto the platform. We were doing as ordered in the company of the aliens. Then one of them, big and pissed off, literally tore apart Mike, Jim, and Sol. Bob and I jumped up and rushed towards the exit. Fortunately, the ship's hatch opened quickly. "Do you know what happened?" asked the president. "No, but just before that, the Hindu came into the ship with a delivery. He was waiting outside the cabin door for some big shot. I have a feeling that's where it all started. Maybe he didn't get a tip and said something." "The Hindu didn't come back," noted the Secretary of State. "This year's Halloween seems to have started off well for us." 3 soldiers of the People's Liberation Army were nearing the end of their leave, and they didn't worry about it at all. A few days spent in Xiaogan's clubs had depleted their budget, and as it turned out, only Chun got lucky. The rest were roped into buying drinks and dinners by local girls, with no chance of forming a closer connection. "They prefer the rich," Fupa remarked. "They prefer the white," Chopin added. Chun remained silent, reminiscing about his partner and the last evening. He had spent his entire salary on a dinner, to which his online acquaintance Shu had invited 2 friends. As they left the restaurant, the girls whispered to each other, casting glances at Chun from time to time. Finally, his new acquaintance smiled at the soldier. "Where do you live?" she asked, sparking enthusiasm in Chen. Unfortunately, it wasn't very romantic afterward. When they entered a small room, the girl with an encouraging smile lay down on the bed and spread her legs, revealing white panties. The boy wanted to say something, but she impatiently gestured for him to come closer. As he approached, she skillfully unbuckled his military belt and pulled down his pants. A few quick movements with her warm hand, and the shy boy was ready. She pulled him towards her and helped guide him with her hand. It all lasted less than a minute. Towards the end, the girl whimpered a few times and, making sure Chan was finished, quickly put on her panties as she had taken them off. Equally quickly, she headed for the door. Clearly, the evening was not over for her, and her friends were waiting somewhere. They said goodbye with a smile. The young soldier spent the rest of the sleepless night wondering what had happened and concluded that it was his fault. He wasn't good enough in bed. He didn't fulfill his manly duty and didn't satisfy the woman. He looked at his sadly dangling member with disdain. He had no chance of being like those people from the internet, especially the blacks, although he avoided such movies. Supposedly, one of the soldiers from the previous intake had watched something like that, and he was found hanging in the bathroom. The young soldiers patrolled the area around the alien spacecraft landing site. The object had landed here a month ago. Limousines and military vehicles occasionally drove to the residential part of the ship. When Chen first saw an alien, he wondered what that big cockroach would taste like deep-fried. Probably because the mess hall in the unit only gave recruits enough calories to survive. Not much else happened. Occasionally, a civilian would push through to the secure area and had to be kicked back behind the fence. That night, on October 31st, it was unusually quiet. The 3 soldiers were separated from the ship by only a yellow and red-painted plastic tape. Walking along it, the guards shared their hardships. A powdered rhino horn. That's when it gets hard. That's illegal. Sure, everything that works is illegal. The rich don't want us to be like them. Now you can't even eat bats. Chopin looked longingly at the dark shapes flying against the night sky. And supposedly, we live in the homeland of peasants, workers, and soldiers. And that's space food, Fupa chimed in. Apparently, when you eat it, no woman can resist a man. And when they eat it, they're so eager. Like kittens. It's true, my colleague. A waiter who worked in such an expensive restaurant said that when guests ate some of that Shomec, they immediately disappeared into the toilet. And once, a very rich woman came alone, ordered Shomec, ate it, and then dragged my colleague into the broom closet and made him do it. And when the manager came to see what was going on, she kicked my colleague out and took care of the manager. That must be intense, Chan said, looking at the heavy bulk of the spaceship. And only for the rich. Now all three were staring at the alien ship, and they probably have it in large quantities. Where are you going? Xian worriedly asked, seeing his friend step over the tape. I'll go see if they have any of that Shomec there. Maybe they'll share. They're supposedly friendly creatures. We're not allowed to approach it. If anything, we'll say we noticed something and had to check it out, Chen decided. The hatch of the spaceship turned out to be open. Apparently, the guests assumed that no unauthorized person would dare to trespass into their vehicle. Chan stared into the poorly lit corridor, already intending to retreat when Shu came to mind. If only he could impress her with something, he would propose another meeting without hesitation. Of course, right after payday. The soldier sighed heavily and, recalling the recent night, entered. The corridors were empty and cool, but pleasant warmth radiated from one of the walls. Chun found the door to the heated room. It turned out to be spacious, with a pool filling its space. In the pool, there were thousands of round shapes floating in an oily liquid. The soldier had seen such things in pictures, on the internet, on lifestyle portals. Shomec, he thought happily. He reached into the pool and pulled out one object. He weighed it in his hand. Heavy. He brought the Shomec to his mouth and bit into the juicy, spongy surface. As he chewed, a shiver of pleasure ran through his body. So, this is what it's like to be rich, he thought. He took out a sandwich wrapped in waxed paper from his pocket. The entire Shomec was too large to take away unnoticed, so he cut off a big piece with his bayonet and wrapped it. I'll treat Shu, he decided, smiling at the thought of the girl's gratitude. He wasn't planning on leaving just yet. He laid down his rifle on the floor and sat down. Leaning against the wall, he surrendered to consumption and basked in the stream of endorphins. This will be my secret, he decided. I won't tell anyone about what I discovered here. He kept his word. Unexpectedly, one of the crew members appeared in the room. He turned his head towards the soldier biting into the Shomec and quickly leaped towards him, tearing him apart with a few strokes of stick-like limbs. On November 1st, all the alien ships, leaving the surprised Earthlings behind, flew away without saying goodbye. A month later, many more arrived, not pretending it was a peace mission. Regular and swift extermination of humanity began. Dr. Priscilla Humslow at a biotechnology conference.
The so-called Shomec consists of undifferentiated cells. In my opinion, these cells have the potential to initiate division and specialization processes. There are hypotheses that this is food for astronauts, and indeed the substance is very nutritious. And you know what else is tasty and nutritious? Eggs.
It should be noted that Dr. Humslow is a declared vegan activist, summarized her work the reviewer. Since humanity perished and the Earth turned into a desert, you are probably wondering who is telling you this story? Yes, I am like you, a human being. The fish-like, before they had to flee Earth from their owners tracking their stolen eggs, visited several Planned Parenthood clinics, where they exchanged Shomec for aborted human fetuses. The embryos turned out to be an excellent addition to the Margariti for the representatives of the civilization of hangers-on. However, some of them were not consumed but incubated as a joke to adult sizes. Now, as pets, we can live in warmth and safety. I am writing this in the Hangers newspaper published for humans to remind you that we should not sow unrest and be conceited. We should be grateful to our masters for saving the species.
Stand up, America, soldiers strong and grand. With the president's call, we defend this land. With hearts of valor, we face the storm's embrace. From the plains to the coast
Terlecki,